Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today we've got an episode of Mint Condition. In episodes like these, I take you through the most recent exciting spoilers from the upcoming set. These cards are going to be selected for a variety of reasons, and some of them might even have a big impact on Commander. Just a quick thank you before we get started to Ashad NG, Eddie Bjorgum, and Kyle Burns who helped me come up with this name. When I asked the community for suggestions, all three of them came up with Mint Condition for this series. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So today we're going to go over the Week 1 recap for Theros Beyond Death. Keep in mind that some of these cards might have been spoiled before that first week unofficially. Also, keep in mind that this list won't be tackling any legendary creatures. During spoiler season, I'm also working on quick takes for legendary creatures, so go ahead and check those out. So let's start things off today with Wavebreak Hippocamp. It's a 2/2 enchantment creature horsefish that costs 2 and a blue. It says whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. This card clearly was made for Commander. This card benefits you heavily for playing on your opponent's turns. It basically makes the first spell that you cast on an opponent's turn become a cantrip. It gives you the opportunity to draw 3 cards in one turn around the table. This is an incredible amount of value and can really help spellslinger decks. The spells you cast are going to get replaced and your hand's going to stay full. This is a pretty unique effect in Commander, but one similar one is Jorian Ruin Diver. She has whenever you cast your second spell each turn, draw a card. Now Jorian is somewhat similar but different since she can actually draw you a card on each turn. The threshold though is higher because you have to cast 2 spells instead of 1. Regardless, both these cards obviously interact very well together. Commanders like Tal'Rain, they're looking to cast a ton of small spells at instant speed, can really benefit from a card like this. Another new and exciting card from this set is Nyx's Lotus. It's a legendary artifact that costs 4 and it enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to choose a color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. Basically, your devotion to a color is the number of mana symbols of that color and the mana cost of permanents you control. Basically, this is going to tap for a ton. Now, it's definitely not for every single deck because you need that devotion to be high enough to make it worth it. But in a monocolor or maybe even 2-color deck, this can really shine. For comparison's sake, Thrain Dynamo is a very efficient mana rock that also costs 4. It doesn't come into play tapped and it taps for 3 mana. Nyx's Lotus might come into play tapped, but it can easily tap for a lot more than that, and that's colored mana too. Essentially, this is a Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, but as a mana rock instead of a land. Now that comes with advantages and disadvantages, but regardless, it's still going to see a ton of play. Next up, there's Allure of the Unknown, which is an extremely unique card. It's a sorcery for 3 black-red, and it says reveal the top 6 cards of your library. An opponent exiles a non-land card from among them, then you put the rest into your hand. That opponent may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So basically, this is a 5 mana, draw 5, but your opponent also gets to cast the best card out of those 6 cards. Now, in a format like Standard, Pioneer, or Modern, this would probably be a pretty bad card. But in a format like Commander, this can be a very fun political card. You get to choose the opponent, so you can wheel and deal and make sure it benefits you as well. We really haven't seen this kind of effect before, especially in Rakdos. The card that did come to mind for me was Brilliant Ultimatum, but that one's more so casting your own things for free. Allure of the Unknown kind of turns that on its head. So again, this might be a good tool for political decks like Queen Marchesa. Again, 5 mana to draw 5 cards is a fantastic deal. And if your opponent can cast something for free that's going to benefit both of you, then it's a win-win. And now let's move on to Setessan Champion. She's a 1/3 human warrior that costs 2 and a green. She has Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Setessan Champion and draw a card. This might just be hands down the best enchantress out there. Let's compare it to the original Verduran enchantress, which says whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you may draw a card. She's also a 0/2 and her mana cost is 1 green. Setessan Champion has a less restrictive casting cost and she starts off bigger. On top of that, every single time an enchantment comes into play, she's going to grow. And unlike Verduran Enchantress, you're also drawing those cards whenever an enchantment comes into play, not just when you cast them. So if you're blinking an enchantment or bringing it back from the graveyard, you get those too. This seems like a no-brainer addition to any kind of Enchantress build, such as Tuvasa the Sunlit. Setessan Champion can provide you a ton of card advantage and be a huge threat. Next up, let's tackle another green card with Nessian Boar. It's a 10/6 boar for 3 green. It has all creatures able to block Nessian Boar do so. And whenever Nessian Boar becomes blocked by a creature, that creature's controller draws a card. So this card has a huge body for just 5 mana. Since it has to be blocked by everything, it can also take out a ton of creatures at once. But the more creatures that block it, the more cards that opponent draws. So there's definitely an upside weighed with the downside on this one. The comparison for this card that immediately came to mind was Grothama. Grothama also has 10 power for 5 mana, and there's also a downside where an opponent can draw a ton of cards. This is definitely something that you can work around for both these creatures in different ways. For example, this could be a great addition to a Gerard deck where you just want to sacrifice big creatures to drain out your opponents. Regardless, it's definitely a unique card, and I'm excited to see where it ends up. But now let's talk about Serpent of Yawning Depths. It's a 6/6 enchantment creature serpent that costs 4 blue. It says krakens, leviathans, octopuses, and serpents you control can't be blocked except by krakens, leviathans, octopuses, and serpents. If your deck isn't built around those creature types specifically, chances are you don't have any of them in your deck. So that essentially means that this and those other creatures are going to be unblockable. This card is kind of like an archetype of imagination, but for very specific creature types. In a sea monster tribal deck like Erixmathes, this can be an absolute bomb. Again, your opponents probably aren't running any krakens, leviathans, octopuses, or serpents, but you definitely are. In a deck like that, this is a 6/6 for 6 mana that makes all your creatures unblockable. In my opinion, this is only going to fit in very specific decks, but those decks that want it really want it. The same can be said for our next card with Deathbellow Warcry. It's a sorcery for 5 red. It says search your library for up to 4 Minotaur creature cards with different names, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So Minotaur is not exactly the most popular creature type. In fact, at the time of this recording, there are less than 80 Minotaurs out there. And no offense to Minotaurs, but for the most part, most of them are pretty lackluster. But still being able to tutor 4 creatures directly onto the battlefield is a very powerful thing. For a comparison card, take a look at Tooth and Nail. With its Entwine cost paid, it's going to be a total of 9 mana and gets you 2 creatures into play. Now, since that can be any 2 creatures and there are plenty of 2 creature combos out there, that's going to be more powerful. But one thing to keep in mind with Deathbellow Warcry is that changelings are Minotaurs too. And getting Moralfon and 3 other things can be very powerful in the right deck. Again, I haven't dug in deeply enough to see if there's any 4 creature combos out there with this, but I'm sure someone will figure it out. Next up, let's tackle another red card with Underworld Breach. It's an enchantment for 1 and a red, and it says each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. And at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. Now, escape is a new mechanic in Theros Beyond Death. Essentially, you can cast cards from your graveyard for their escape cost. This card seems like it can be extremely broken. Again, I'm not sure what the exact combo is, but I'm sure there's combos out there that can make this really work. For comparison's sake, some cards that immediately came to mind were Past in Flames and Yawgmoth's Will. Past in Flames is going to give your instants and sorceries flashback, and Yawgmoth's Will let you play anything from your graveyard, but cards that are going to be put in your graveyard are exiled instead. These are very powerful and abusable cards, and I'm sure Underworld Breach can be abused as well. I'm excited to see what kind of a deck it ends up in, but I think a Storm build is probably what you'll see. And now let's move on to our next card with Woestrider. It's a 3/2 horror that costs 2 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/1 white goat creature token. It allows you to sacrifice a creature to scry 1. And then it has escape for 3 black by exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard. And when it escapes with 2/1/1 counters on it. So basically, this is a free sacrifice outlet that comes with a buddy. This is also a sacrifice outlet that provides you value, and you can get it back. A recurable, value-centric sacrifice outlet like this seems very powerful. A similar card with Visira Seer sees a ton of play in the right decks. Visira Seer costs less and only has that sacrifice part, but keep in mind that it can sacrifice itself where Woestrider can't. But for that extra 2 mana, again, you're getting a ton of value from that Woestrider. This seems like an obvious include in any kind of aristocrat-style strategy like Taste of Karlov. A free sacrifice outlet that provides you value and a piece of sacrifice fodder that can be brought back seems huge. But now let's talk about Terror of Mount Velis. It's a 5/5 dragon with flying and double strike that costs 5 red. It has when it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. So basically, this is a huge threat that also buffs your team the turn it comes into play. It's going to double up the amount of damage that your team's dealing, and it's also swinging for 10 itself. In terms of a card for comparison, it's somewhat like an Avatar of Slaughter. Giving all your creatures double strike on a creature isn't too common. And like Avatar of Slaughter, it fits right into a deck like Ilharg the Razeboar. In that deck, you can cheat it out to pump up your team, and it will be attacking as well. Also, this can obviously fit right into any kind of a dragon deck or the new Purpose deck as well. But now let's move back to talking about sea monsters with Nadir Kraken. Nadir Kraken is a 2/3 Kraken that costs 1 blue. It says whenever you draw a card, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Nadir Kraken and create a 1/1 blue tentacle creature token. This is an extremely low to the ground Kraken, which you usually don't see. Most Krakens have a very high CMC, so that definitely bucks that trend. But this Kraken can easily help you build your board and become a threat itself. As long as you're paying for it, the more cards that you draw, the bigger this is going to get and the more tokens you get as well. A similar card to look to is Chasm Skulker. Now with Chasm Skulker, you don't have to pay to get those counters on it. But you're also not getting those tokens until Chasm Skulker dies. Now, this can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on the situation. Now getting those tokens right away from drawing is kind of like that Locust God effect. But again, unlike Locust God, you will have to pay for them. But next up, let's touch on Nylea's Intervention. It's a sorcery for X green and says choose 1. Search your library for up to X land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library, or Nylea's Intervention deals twice X damage to each creature with flying. Now the most likely use for this one is probably going to be that first choice. Make sure you're noticing that this doesn't say basic lands. This can get you any of your powerful or broken lands like Naya's Cradle or Nykthos. We really haven't seen this exact kind of effect, but one similar card that came to my mind was New Frontiers. Now New Frontiers is definitely different because it's getting everyone basic lands into play. But to my knowledge, this is the first X spell that we've seen that gets any land into your hand. Now obviously this can be great for any deck that wants to get specific lands into their hand. And it seems like an auto-include for a deck like Borborygmos and Rage that just wants to chuck lands at opponents. And now let's go on to Glimpse of Freedom. It's a very simple card. It's an instant for 1 and a blue and it says draw a card. What makes it really interesting is that it has escape for 2 and a blue, exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. 2 mana for 1 card at instant speed is not a bad deal, but it's not a great one. But having access to this as repeatable card draw can be huge. As long as you've got 5 other cards in your graveyard, you can draw a card at any time you want for just 3 mana. Some similar cards to this one are Think Twice and Radical Idea. Each of these can be cast 1 time from your graveyard, since Think Twice has Flashback and Radical Idea has Jumpstart. But Glimpse of Freedom can be cast over and over again as long as you've got cards to exile with it. Time will definitely tell how effective a card like this can be. But today's final card is Ox of Agonis. It's a 4/2 Ox that costs 3 red. When it enters the battlefield, you discard your hand, then you draw 3 cards. It has an escape cost of red, and exile 8 other cards from your graveyard, and it escapes with a +1/+1 counter on it. So like Glimpse of Freedom, this can be repeatable card draw from your graveyard. Discarding your hand to draw 3 cards is a very good deal in red. And again, discarding your hand actually helps you fuel that escape cost too. A card that we can definitely compare this to is Bedlam Reveler. It also works with graveyard-centric decks and makes you discard your hand to draw 3. A Reanimator deck like Chainer, Nightmare Adept can probably work with this. Having to discard cards to draw is a good thing for that deck. And if you need to, you can also get around that escape cost by using Chainer to cast it from your graveyard. And with that, this show is coming to a close. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on these spoilers are. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.